person. I'm looking for young people. That's the future of our party. There's a young person.
Hi there, my name is Jack.
Pair of Jacks, we're off to a good start. We're playing that poker game on TV.
I've become incredibly disheartened by Ottawa, and I was wondering what kind of changes you were going to make to revitalize my confidence, as well as the confidence of my peers in our government.
Well, that's a very important question, and it's a somewhat general question, because I think so many people just shake their heads at what they see going on in Ottawa. They see people being stuffed into the Senate and getting cushy appointments, and then watching those very conservative senators turn around and kill a climate change bill that most Canadians were behind. They want us taking action on these things. And they watch unelected people blocking action that the people want to see. And they get turned off by that. They walk away from it. They say, what is going on? Well, we've got to reform our democracy, and that means working towards some form of proportional representation.
Yeah! Yeah!
Senate. We certainly don't need an unelected group of people doing that kind of thing. And we shouldn't be having failed candidates, people that were defeated by the people, being stuffed into the Senate with cushy salaries to then go out and campaign in elections for the Conservatives. That's the kind of thing that's going on here right now. We would say that this kind of thing has to stop, and we put rules in place to make sure that it does stop. But there's more to it than that. I think what you're really coming at is the fact that in politics, you far too often get promises that are then turned around and simply broken. And we're saying you've seen that same old story before from both of these parties. They're the ones that have been in power over the years. And they always try to tell us that you've only got one choice. It reminds me of Tommy Douglas's stories about the black cats and the white cats. It's two sides of the same coin. But they're still taking your money. And they're not making sure that your family gets what it needs when it's facing real challenges. And that's why we've put forward these commitments as New Democrats. And that's why we've put a timeline on them and a price tag on them. And sure, they're not going to change the whole world tomorrow. They're practical. They're step by step. But that's how you start on a long journey. Is you put that first step forward in a new direction, and you march right on there with your friends and your fellow citizens to build the better country that we know is possible. And that's how we do it.
Pretty high.
Hi, Dennis Rayfield. Over the last 20 years, the income of the bottom two-thirds of Canadians have gone nowhere. And Canada's had one of the greatest increases in inequality and poverty. Actually, we've been in the top 2. How do we educate Canadians and get them to see the links between the deteriorating day-to-day circumstances and the people that are running things?
Well, first of all, I have to say you write rather good books on this subject. So if people would read those books, that would be a good start. But I spoke about that a bit in my speech earlier. Here we see tax policies, for example, that sound interesting, but what they really do is help to increase inequality in our society. We're making proposals to try to address the needs of the average hard-working folks and the people that are being left behind. And we're saying, let's not go ahead with more tax cuts to banks. Do you know what the banks did with their tax cuts? They took half of their billions of dollars of tax cuts and gave it away in bonuses to their top-performing managers.
Gee,
so your tax dollars went to the millionaires.
shame.
Now I say let them go out and buy a lottery ticket if that's what they're interested in. Of course, they don't have to do that. They don't buy lottery tickets because they know Stephen Harper's going to help them out. What we say is families struggling to get by with children and costs they can't meet. It's time that we increased, and we're putting a child tax credit in place for every child, and we're going to ramp it up over the years, because the goal here is to lift every child out of poverty, and that should be a goal for every Canadian to share.
Question in the back here, Jack. There you go.
My name's Margaret Beer. I was wondering whether or not you have a position. All of these things will cost something. One way to gain some money is to back up on all of that supposed get tough legislation that the Conservatives are trying to bring in, the building new prisons and all the rest of it when we know the crime is going down, and that most of those things are in fact dangerous initiatives rather than just ineffective ones. Do you have a position on that?
Well, we certainly don't believe in the endless construction of prisons, no matter what the cost, as some kind of a... We say, let's focus on prevention and make investments in the kinds of programs, particularly in parts of the community where young people are preyed upon by those that want to drag them into criminal activity and gangs and what have you. If you've got community centers and rec centers and school gyms and all kinds of things, some laws, however, and we're suggesting that if you go out and try to recruit a kid to get involved in a gang, that specific act ought to be a criminal offense. That's just not right to do that kind of thing to young people. Some of the laws that the Conservatives have proposed, we do not support. For example, there's a proposed law, Bill C-10, that would put much tougher penalties in place for possession of very small amounts of marijuana and so on and so forth. We don't think that's the best approach. We think there's much more positive approaches. We could save some money there and put it into prevention and deterrence programs. Some of the laws we do support. We do need some tougher laws in certain cases because there are some crimes that are still on the rise, and we've got to take account of that. We also need more community policing. Because when you've got the officers out in the community connecting with people, positive things can happen. And Stephen Harper promised to do that and never delivered. We'll make sure that community policing is supported in this country as well.
So we're going to take one last question, and I'm putting it over to Carrie Ann in the back there. Carrie?
Here we go. We can take your question right off your board. Oh, here we are. And it's in French. How would you solve the housing crisis?
Yeah.
Well, Colin, I think you may know this. I wrote a book once called Homelessness, the Making and Unmaking of the Housing Crisis. Unfortunately, I had to update it 10 years later because the solutions had not been put in place. We should make sure that nobody has to be homeless in a rich country like Canada. On these issues since before time began, as far as I'm concerned, a great champion, and our deputy leader, Libby Davies, has a bill before the House of Commons that would say that no matter who's in government, and you're recognizing a pattern here, because we're putting a framework, we're putting the building blocks for the kind of society we want to build. And we're doing it in legislation, not with empty promises and numbers off into the future. We're saying let's do it now. And this would require anyone elected in Canada as the government to have a national affordable housing policy and for them to be accountable to the Canadian people to make sure it's implemented, and then to put the dollars in behind it as we've done in our platform, because we must end homelessness and deal with the affordable housing crisis right across this country, including the First Nations.
So Jack, it's back to you. We got a lot of work to do the rest of the day, so I'm leaving it back to you so we can all go out and hit the streets.
Well, I want to thank everybody for coming out today. This has been an important discussion about the priorities that are before us. And I have to say, I draw a lot of inspiration, a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of energy from all of you here today, and the kind of issues that you raise. And I'm simply making a commitment to you, and it is to do everything within my power to achieve these goals together with you. And I am confident that we can get there. Sometimes these journeys are long and they can be frustrating. And sometimes they throw all kinds of curves at us to try and distract and divide Canadians. We certainly see that from Stephen Harper all the time. Divide people from one another. That is not the kind of leadership this country needs. We need to pull together to build the kind of country that we dream of for our kids and for our grandkids. And I know we can do it. And I'm counting on you for the next 3 weeks to do practically nothing else but take us towards that bright future that lies before us.